What's the real price of a seat at the table? And are you willing to pay it, even when they try to make you feel like you don't belong? He had come prepared to humiliate her on live television. But by the time Karoline Leavitt had finished, the entire studio sat in stunned silence. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Karoline Leavitt wasn't new to interviews. She had faced tough questions before, handled hostile debates, and stood her ground in conversations designed to shake her. Yet, something about this one felt different. A chill, perhaps, of foreboding. She had first received the invitation a week ago from a high-profile news program. Not just any show, but one notorious for its confrontational style. A show where guests weren't merely questioned, but cornered. Where the host, a seasoned journalist with decades of experience, had built his reputation on belittling younger guests who didn't fit his narrow worldview. Karoline had done her homework. Richard Caldwell, the journalist in question, was a veteran known for his sharp tongue and his relentless knack for exposing those he deemed unworthy of the spotlight. His strategy was brutally simple: provoke, discredit, and, if necessary, humiliate. It wasn't about fostering genuine conversation. It was about control. And tonight, Karoline was his target. Even before she stepped into the studio, she could hear the murmur of criticism. Too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. The labels meant nothing to her. What stung was the arrogance of men like Caldwell, who believed a mere smirk and a raised eyebrow could shake her. The moment she arrived, the unspoken condescension was palpable. The producer, a man in his mid-50s, greeted her with a thin, unwelcoming smile, while a younger assistant offered a hesitant nod and avoided eye contact. It was an atmosphere designed to remind her that she wasn't expected to win this exchange. But Karoline wasn't there to play by their rules. Seated in a makeup chair, she barely registered the stylist's gentle brush of powder over her face. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caldwell's distinct voice wrapping up his current segment. A measured, confident tone honed over years of controlling conversations. The stylist adjusted the collar of her blazer and asked, "You ready?" Karoline met her reflection in the mirror, her eyes filled with a quiet fire. Without a word, she simply nodded. Minutes later, she was led into the studio. The lights were blinding, and the air-conditioned room felt unnaturally cold. The audience, composed mostly of journalists and industry insiders, sat silently just beyond the camera, waiting, watching. Caldwell was already in his chair, legs crossed, wearing a practiced smile that wasn't meant to welcome, but to challenge. His fingers drummed against the desk as Karoline took her seat. "Karoline Leavitt," he began, elongating her name as if savoring it for the first time. "Welcome to the show." She nodded, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "Thanks for having me." His eyes flickered as they scanned her, assessing how much resistance she might offer. Leaning forward slightly, his barely concealed smirk turned his next words into a veiled insult. "You've made quite a name for yourself in a short time. Some might say, too fast for someone with so little experience." Karoline held his gaze. She had expected this, the subtle attempt to plant doubt from the very first sentence. "I think experience comes from action, not just years," she replied evenly. Caldwell let out a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head as if amused. "Ah, but isn't that what every young upstart says before they realize they're in over their head?" That was his first move, to make her shrink, to force her to second-guess herself. Karoline didn't blink, but Caldwell wasn't finished. Tilting his head, his fingers tapped the desk in mock curiosity. "I have to ask, though, do you really believe you've earned a seat at this table? Or is this just another case of someone trying to skip the hard work and go straight for the spotlight?" At that moment, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. It wasn't going to be a simple conversation. It was about to become a battle. But Karoline had never been one to back down from a fight. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his eyes locked onto her like a predator sizing up its prey. The room felt colder, the tension thick enough to cut through. Karoline knew this tactic all too well. Establish dominance early, forcing the guest to play defense from the get-go. But she wasn't here to defend herself. She was here to challenge that notion. Straightening her posture, she met Caldwell's gaze without hesitation. "I don't believe success follows a strict timeline," she declared. "If someone is competent, driven, and prepared, why should they have to wait their turn?" Caldwell smirked and shook his head slightly. "That's the thing about younger generations, always in a rush. You talk about preparation, but let's be honest, experience matters. And frankly, many would argue you haven't paid your dues." A faint chuckle came from off-camera, probably a producer expecting her to stumble. But she didn't. "I think the whole idea of paying dues is just a way to keep people in their place," she countered. "What exactly are we talking about? A waiting period? An arbitrary number of years before someone's opinion is considered valid? The world doesn't work that way anymore." Caldwell's smirk twitched. He had expected a rehearsed, polished response. Predictable, neat. Instead, she had given him something he couldn't dismiss. He shifted in his chair, his tone laced with condescension. "That sounds convenient, but let's be real. People don't just wake up one day and suddenly deserve a platform. It takes time, hard work, and, yes, the wisdom that comes with age." Karoline let a brief silence pass, just enough for his words to settle. "Wisdom comes from experience," she said, "but experience isn't just about age. It's about what you do with the opportunities you have. Some people spend decades in a field and never break through, while others, through sheer work ethic, insight, and innovation, make an impact almost immediately." Caldwell chuckled under his breath. "And I assume you place yourself in that second category." She tilted her head slightly. "I'll let my work speak for itself." For a split second, Caldwell's expression flickered with irritation. She wasn't playing his game. But he wasn't done yet. Leaning forward, his voice dropped a notch. "All right then, let's talk about credibility. Some would say that in today's world it's dangerously easy to build a following without truly understanding the subject. Social media amplifies voices that previous generations might have ignored, for good reason." A murmur rippled through the studio. The audience was no longer just watching. They were invested. Karoline's heartbeat remained steady. She could see exactly where he was steering this, trying to undermine her credibility, painting her as merely a product of the digital age instead of someone who had earned her place. She didn't flinch. "I find it funny how those in power always say that," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Right until someone younger outperforms them. Then suddenly, it's not about skills or results. It's all about credibility, and the goalposts just keep moving." Caldwell's smirk persisted, though it now seemed forced. "So you're saying expertise doesn't matter?" "Not at all," she replied smoothly. "I'm saying that expertise isn't exclusive to those who've been doing things the same way for decades. Sometimes it's the ones asking new questions who are truly moving things forward." Caldwell inhaled slowly and exhaled through his nose. His next move was clear. He needed to regain control of the conversation. But Karoline had shifted the balance of power, and she wasn't letting go. Straightening in his chair and smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his sleeve, he continued, "Let's talk specifics. You've positioned yourself as a strong voice in your field, but when we look at your background, there's a noticeable lack of, shall we say, traditional credentials. No decades of experience, no long list of past leadership positions. So, why should anyone trust your perspective over someone with that kind of history?" Even as his words echoed the unspoken sentiment, "You don't belong here. You haven't earned this." Karoline stood firm. Her reply was a clear challenge to the old guard's assumptions. Karoline maintained her steady gaze. "I believe people trust results," she said simply. "When someone is effective, when they produce meaningful work, people take notice. It doesn't matter if you've been in the game for 2 years or for 20. Caldwell exhaled sharply, a sound that was half laugh and half scoff. "Results. Let's be honest. Public attention doesn't always equate to quality. We've seen plenty of folks gain influence for all the wrong reasons. Caroline nodded, as if she'd anticipated his retort. Absolutely. But if someone stays relevant, if people consistently turn to them for insight, and their work holds up over time, that's when you know it's genuine. A few lucky breaks won't sustain you in the long run. Real impact does. The corners of Caldwell's mouth twitched again, and Caroline recognized it for what it was: frustration. She wasn't taking the bait, wasn't fumbling, and certainly wasn't playing the defensive role he expected. Yet, he wasn't ready to let it go. Okay, he said, shifting tactics. But let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. The world has changed. We live in an era where opinions are tossed around carelessly, where facts are, he made air quotes, interpreted to suit whoever's saying them. Do you think your confidence comes from the fact that, up until now, no one has really challenged you? The audience fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. Caroline allowed a beat of silence to pass before responding. I think people often confuse confidence with arrogance. I've been challenged plenty. But being questioned by those who assume they already know better isn't a real challenge, it's just gatekeeping. Caldwell blinked, and Caroline caught the subtle shift in his expression. She continued, The real test isn't whether someone can challenge me. It's whether I hold up under pressure. His fingers tapped the desk, a quick, unconscious gesture, revealing he hadn't expected that answer. All right, he said slowly. So you believe that results and resilience speak louder than time served? I do, she replied evenly. He exhaled through his nose and then leaned in. Then let's put that resilience to the test. The tone of the conversation shifted noticeably. It was clear he had been saving his next card for this moment. But Caroline wasn't just holding her ground now. She was steering the conversation, and Caldwell was well aware of it. Caldwell adjusted his posture, planting both elbows on the desk. Gone was the easy, condescending amusement. It had been replaced by something colder, a calculated decision to strike harder. Since you're so confident in your own credibility, let's talk about why people question it. Caroline didn't rush to respond. She knew better than to step into a trap without understanding its full shape. Caldwell didn't wait. He pulled a sheet of paper from the stack before him. A prop meant to lend undeniable weight to his next point. After scanning it for a moment, he looked back up. You've been accused of pushing narratives that suit your agenda, instead of sticking strictly to the facts. Some critics even suggest you deliberately leave out details that don't support your perspective. Would you say that's fair criticism? Caroline met his gaze without blinking. He was trying to paint her as dishonest, manipulative. It wasn't just about her credentials now. He was attacking her integrity. Tilting her head slightly, she replied, I'd say that's an easy accusation to throw around when someone doesn't like what I have to say. Caldwell raised an eyebrow, as if amused. So you're saying your critics just don't like you? No, she said firmly. I'm saying that when people lack a strong argument against the substance of what I say, they attack the messenger instead. It's a classic deflection tactic. Caldwell let out a slow breath through his nose. A deflection tactic, he repeated. So when people claim you've ignored inconvenient facts, they're just making that up? Caroline leaned forward slightly. Here's the thing. Every discussion has multiple angles. I focus on the parts that are most relevant to my point, just like you do, just like every journalist does. That's not deception, it's framing. And if someone thinks I've left out something important, they're free to bring it up, and I'll address it. Caldwell's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the paper. The tension in the room was palpable as both sides stood firm on their positions. He had expected her to flinch, to scramble for a defense. Instead, she met him head-on. All right, he began, his tone edged with challenge. Let's take this beyond mere framing. You've built your platform on confidence, on the idea that you have all the answers. But what happens when you're wrong? Have you ever admitted to making a mistake? His words were designed to make her hesitate, to let the audience see her falter, if only for a moment. But Caroline didn't. Of course, she replied easily. I've been wrong before, that's part of learning. But here's the difference. When I realize I'm wrong, I don't double down to save face. I correct it and move forward. A slight tightening of Caldwell's jaw preceded a forced smirk. And yet, some say you never acknowledge your mistakes, he prodded. Karoline allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Some people say a lot of things, she said. That doesn't make them true. A few chuckles rose from the audience, not at her, but at him. The balance of the conversation had shifted once again, and Caldwell could feel it. He tapped a sheet of paper against the desk and exhaled slowly. He still had moves left, but Karoline could now see the frustration simmering beneath his veneer. So, let's get this straight, he continued. You're young, you're outspoken, and you challenge conventional wisdom. Yet you think none of the criticism against you holds any weight? Karoline shook her head slightly. That's not what I said, she answered. I believe criticism is valuable, but not all criticism is honest. Much of it comes from people who just don't want to hear a perspective that challenges their own. Caldwell opened his mouth to retort, but she pressed on. Let's be real, she added. People in your position have spent years deciding who deserves to be taken seriously and who doesn't. So when someone comes along, refuses to wait for permission, and doesn't play by the old rules, you call it a lack of credibility. But what you're really upset about is losing control of the conversation. A few murmurs rippled from the audience, and Caldwell's jaw shifted. She had struck a nerve. Instead of backing down, however, he forced another tight smile and made one last desperate play. Then let's talk about control, he said. Right now, you're sitting in a seat that a lot of people don't think you deserve. I have to ask, what happens when they're right? The studio fell silent. A direct challenge hanging in the air. A final push meant to knock her off balance. Yet Karoline remained unshaken, her gaze steady. That's the real question, isn't it? She said evenly. Not whether I'm competent, not whether my arguments hold up, but whether I deserve to be here. That's what this has been about from the start. Caldwell leaned forward, latching onto the word deserve. Exactly. There's a difference between being loud and being qualified, between being popular and actually earning respect. Karoline exhaled, a short, measured breath. Not out of frustration, but with quiet amusement. Respect isn't given, Richard, she said firmly. It's taken. The weight of those 3 words seemed to hang in the air. Even Caldwell's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered. You talk about qualifications, Karoline continued, her voice unwavering. But let's be honest, a lot of people in positions of power didn't earn their spot. They were born into the right family, knew the right people, and said the right things to the right audience. And no one ever questioned whether they deserved to be there. But when someone like me, who built her own platform and doesn't wait for permission, comes along, suddenly it's all about qualifications. The audience shifted. Some nodded, a few murmured in agreement. Caldwell crossed his arms. So you think you're above criticism? No, Karoline snapped instantly. I think criticism should be fair. The reality is, people like me will always be held to a different standard. We're expected to be twice as sharp, twice as prepared, twice as perfect, just to earn half the respect. And even when we prove ourselves, the goalposts keep moving. Caldwell's jaw tensed further, but Karoline didn't stop. You call it arrogance, she said. I call it refusing to wait for a seat at a table that was never built for me. A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a reckoning. Caldwell exhaled, rolling his shoulder back. That's a strong answer, he admitted. But confidence isn't proof. If you're wrong about something, are you willing to admit it? Karoline gave a small, determined nod. Absolutely. Being questioned by people who've already made up their minds about me isn't the same as being wrong. She thought, while Caldwell sat in stunned silence. For the first time in the entire interview, he had nothing to say. A heavy silence settled over the room, and everyone could feel the narrative Caldwell had tried so hard to control unraveling before their eyes. Karoline watched him closely, waiting for even a flicker of a reaction. No smirk, no comeback, only silence. The cameras captured every moment. Finally, Caldwell exhaled slowly. He glanced at his notes, flipped a page, and then set them down with a quiet finality. The energy in the room had shifted, and he knew it. Karoline did too. In that moment, it was clear she had won. The studio remained completely still. The weight of her words had permeated every corner, creating an undeniable tension, the kind of moment that can't be manufactured, a moment that changes the course of a conversation entirely. Caldwell's fingers twitched lightly on the desk as he searched for something sharp enough to cut through the silence, but there was nothing left to say. The crew exchanged knowing glances. The producers, seated just beyond the cameras, looked at one another, waiting for Caldwell to break the stillness. He didn't. He couldn't. One of the panelists off camera cleared their throat, as if preparing to step in, but even they hesitated. To interrupt now would only confirm what everyone already knew. This wasn't just an interview. It was a defining moment. Karoline didn't move. She let the silence linger, knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after making your point is to simply let people sit with it. The seconds ticked by, too long for TV, yet long enough for the home audience to feel its gravity. Caldwell's lips parted slightly before pressing into a thin line. His hand, which had clung to his stack of papers throughout the interview, simply lifted them and let them fall onto the desk. The message was clear. He was out of moves, and Karoline? She remained exactly where she had been, steady, unshaken. One of the producers, recognizing the moment for what it was, quickly gestured toward the control booth. The camera angle shifted, capturing a wider shot that framed the entire studio. The audience, the panelists, Caldwell with his shoulders slightly slumped, and Karoline, unmoved, unapologetic, unstoppable. Finally, Caldwell let out a quiet, forced chuckle. "Well," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "that's certainly one way to look at it." Karoline simply smiled. Caldwell straightened his papers, buying himself a moment, then glanced toward the cameras. "We'll leave it at that. Karoline Leavitt, thank you for your time." But everyone watching knew the truth. This wasn't just an interview. It was a statement. And Karoline had made hers louder than Caldwell ever expected. As the cameras cut, the energy in the studio shifted again. The tension didn't vanish. It simply transformed. Producers whispered among themselves, and the sound tech removed his headset a bit too slowly, as if still processing what had just happened. A few panelists exchanged looks, but no one spoke. Even Caldwell, who normally ended his interviews with a firm handshake and a smooth segue to commercial, sat for one beat too long before pushing back his chair. Karoline took her time as she left. She didn't rush, didn't scramble to check her phone or shake hands with the producers. She let the moment settle because she knew what had just happened. Everyone in the room did. A junior assistant who had barely exchanged a word with her upon arrival stepped forward hesitantly. "That was, really something," she murmured. Karoline glanced at the assistant and offered a small, knowing smile. "Yeah," she said simply. It was. No more needed to be said. She gathered her things and walked past the set, past the lingering crew. As she passed, snippets of conversation reached her ears. Remarks like, "She handled that better than I thought she would," and "Caldwell really couldn't land that last one, huh?" But she never backed down. Karoline didn't react because she didn't need to. Her work here was done. Stepping outside into the cool evening air, she finally pulled out her phone. Her notifications were exploding. Clips from the interview were already circulating. People were talking. Not just about what she said, but about how she said it. About the fact that she hadn't flinched, stumbled, or shrunk. She had walked into a space designed to cast doubt on her and left without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. And that's the lesson. People will always question you. Not because you're wrong, but because you're different. Because you don't fit their mold. Because you didn't wait for them to approve you before you decided to take up space. They'll challenge your credentials, your intelligence, your right to be in the room. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can shrink, apologize for existing, and try to prove, on their terms, that you belong. Or you can do what Karoline did. Stand your ground, remain steady, and let your presence do the talking. Because at the end of the day, people respect what they cannot shake. And Karoline? She left that studio unshaken. If you've ever felt like someone was trying to put you in your place, remember this moment. Remember that your confidence isn't arrogance, and your presence isn't something to apologize for. And if you ever find yourself sitting across from someone like Caldwell, don't flinch, don't fold, and most importantly, don't let them decide if you deserve to be there, because you already do, with the unspoken rules of confidence. How to own your space without saying a word. We often think of confidence as something we say, a bold statement, a strong argument, a well-delivered presentation. But true confidence often speaks loudest in the silences, in the way we carry ourselves, in the unwavering gaze that says, "I belong here." It's about mastering the unspoken rules of power and presence. Think back to Karoline Leavitt's interview. Her most powerful moments weren't always her sharpest retorts. They were the moments of composed silence, the time she held Caldwell's gaze without flinching, the way she let her presence fill the room after delivering a particularly impactful point. She understood that silence can be a weapon, a shield, and a statement, all in one. So, how can you cultivate this kind of unspoken confidence? Here are a few key principles. Embrace the power of the pause. Before answering a challenging question, take a beat. This isn't hesitation, it's deliberation. It shows you're not rattled, you're considering your response, and you're in control of the pace of the conversation. Master your body language. Stand tall, make eye contact, but don't stare intensely. Find a natural balance, and use open, expansive gestures. Avoid fidgeting, shrinking, or making yourself smaller. Your body language communicates your level of confidence long before you utter a word. Own your space. Don't apologize for taking up space, whether it's in a meeting, on a stage, or in a conversation. Occupy your physical space with intention and purpose. This doesn't mean being aggressive. It means being present and unapologetic. Silence the inner critic. We all have that nagging voice that whispers doubts and insecurities. Learn to recognize it, acknowledge it, and then dismiss it. Replace negative self-talk with affirmations of your worth and capabilities. Know your value. True confidence comes from a deep understanding of your own worth and the value you bring to the table. It's not about arrogance. It's about knowing your strengths and owning them. Don't seek external validation. Don't rely on others to tell you you're good enough. Your confidence should be rooted in your own self-belief, not in the approval of others. Practice, practice, practice. Like any skill, confidence takes practice. Start small, in low-stakes situations, and gradually build your way up to more challenging environments. The most powerful form of confidence isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the most present, the most grounded, the most unshakable. It's about knowing your worth and radiating that knowledge without needing to shout it from the rooftops. What are your go-to strategies for projecting confidence, even when you're feeling nervous or challenged? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you found this article helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful insights and stories.